Dennis Morrison's The Time Hoppers on Gilligan's Island. Now this is the Ballad of the Island. I want you to sit back and hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from a tropic port aboard the Time Hopper. The time continuum started getting rough. The tiny hopper was lost. If not for the courage of the fearless three travelers, the hoppers would be lost. Yes, the hoppers would be lost. The hopper set ground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle with Professor Dan Collins, his son Danny too, and his daughter Charla, here on Gilligan's Island. On their way back from seeing the inauguration of President Lincoln, the Time Hoppers experienced an electrical pulse storm in the space-time continuum which disrupted their path of travel. "Where are we, Dad?" Danny asked as they walked along the beach. "According to the Time Hoppers' calculations, this is 1964, the professor said, and we are on an island in the South Pacific." Charla asked, "But which island, Dad?" "Well, that's hard to say," was his quick reply. "There are so many small islands down here, it's probably deserted." "Really?" Charlotte exclaimed. "Then who's that guy over there with that looks like he has nothing under that dorky hat but a lot of empty air?" Danny gave her a frown. "Now that isn't very nice, Charlotte. We don't even know him." Then the skinny man in the dorky hat saw them. He looked very surprised and very happy. So happy that he ran over to them babbling. "Hi, where are you all from? My name's Gilligan. We're shipwrecked here on this island. There are 7 of us. Oh, I better get the skipper. Well, come on with me. I'll take you to him. Oh yeah, what's your names? I am so excited. I thought we'd never get rescued." Professor Collins held up a hand. "Calm down there, little man. I'm Professor Dan Collins, and these are my children, Danny and Charla." Gilligan was so excited. "Come on, I'll take you to the skipper." So together, the 4 made their way down a jungle path which opened up to a clearing where there was a small village of grass huts. A very heavy-set man in a nautical-looking hat looked up in disbelief. Gilligan introduced the Time Hoppers to the skipper. "Well, hello, folks," the skipper said, tipping his hat. "How'd you 3 get here to the island? More importantly, can you get us off the island?" "Well, we might be able to help you get rescued," the professor replied, "but we do have some repairs to make on our Time Hopper. You see, well, this might be kind of hard to believe, but we 3 are from the future." "Well," the skipper replied, "if it's technical help you need, we have a true genius here on the island with us. His name is Professor Hinckley. Gilligan, quick, go get the professor and the others." Just then a voice came from the path. "No need, skipper. I'm right here. I heard what you just said to Professor Collins." You expect me to believe that you came here from another time?" Professor Hinckley asked. Charlotte crossed her arms. "Well, we are," she exclaimed indignantly. Then Danny added, "Our dad invented a time machine, and we call it the Time Hopper." Then Professor Collins explained, "But I need some help repairing an electrical circuit that was burned out in a really bad storm we ran into in the space-time continuum." Professor Hinckley replied, "Well, I'm your man. I tell you what, let's go have a look at your Time Hopper." So the 2 professors went to the Time Hopper while Danny and Charla got to meet Mary Ann and a real-life movie star, Ginger Grant. "Gee, Miss Grant, you sure are pretty," Danny said with a dreamy look in his eyes. And Charla added, "You sure are. Just last week on the Late Show, I saw a movie you were in. You were just wonderful, you were." "Well, I'm glad you liked the movie," Ginger replied with a glow after the compliments. "Charla, why don't you come with me? Mary Ann and I are just about to get dinner ready." Gilligan looked to Danny. "And why don't you come with me, little buddy? I was going to go explore some caves. Sometimes I find some really cool stuff." So all 3 Time Hoppers went their separate ways. In the Time Hopper, Professor Collins explained the problem to Professor Hinckley. "You see, Professor, the Time Hopper works on a simple principle of time, location, and space location, powered by what I call my greatest invention of all, the space-time oscillator capacitor. The storm, though, it totally fried it, I'm afraid." "I see. I think I can help you, but what we have here on the island is pretty crude, Dan. It may take some time, but God has never let the kids and I down, and I don't believe he'll let us down now. So let's get busy," Professor Collins said. Professor Hinckley shook his head. "You're a scientist and you believe in God? How can you?" Dan Collins gave him a serious look. "Because my studies have shown me that God is the greatest scientist ever. His amazing creation shows that. Maybe we'll have more time to talk about that while we're here." "Maybe, but don't expect me to change my mind," Professor Hinckley said. Danny and Gilligan went to a cave which Gilligan had never been in before. They had torches to light the way and shovels that Gilligan had made from dried bamboo stalks and very large clamshells that he had found on the beach. Gilligan said, "Sometimes I find old stuff in the caves made by the natives who lived around here. Awesome, Danny replied. Maybe we'll find some great old artifacts in the cave. I'd love that. And boy, did they find ancient relics. There were pots, masks, idols, tools, and jewelry. In fact, it was the best find Gilligan had made in the 9 months he had been on the island. Gilligan exclaimed, "Let me get this stuff to the professor. I mean, our professor. He'll know all about it. I don't think there's anything that he doesn't know about." "My dad, too," Danny said proudly. "He is like Top Gun when it comes to anything about history." So they gathered up their finds and headed for the village. On the path they happened upon the skipper. With a curious look, the skipper asked, "What have you got there, little buddy?" which is what the skipper oftentimes called his first mate, Gilligan. "Some really old stuff Danny and I dug up in the cave over by the North Bay," Gilligan replied. "You what?" the skipper exclaimed. "Take it back. Take it all right back before where you found it. Take it back right now." "But why, Skipper?" Gilligan asked, sounding disappointed. "This stuff is probably cursed. I've spent my whole life around these islands, Gilligan, and I have seen some pretty strange things happen when witch doctors' personal things are tampered with. So take it all back, right now." Just then an elderly, aristocratic-looking man walked up to them. "Take what back, Captain?" The skipper looked to Danny. "This is Thurston Howell III and his wife Lovey. This is Danny Collins." "Oh, yes, yes. Well, good to meet you, young man. There's a big reward for your father if he gets us rescued," Thurston informed. The skipper explained, "I was just telling Gilligan and Danny that they have to take these old relics back to the cave where they found them. They're cursed," the skipper informed them. "Take them back!" Howell exclaimed indignantly. "Are you daft, Skipper? They're worth a fortune, my good man. Gilligan, I will pay you and Danny for these, and I'll pay you to dig for more." The skipper answered for them. They don't want to, Mr. Howell. Keep your money. Now you guys get going and put them back right now." Soon Professor Collins and Hinckley were in on the conversation. After an unsuccessful attempt to make the skipper believe there was no curse on the relics, Gilligan and Danny agreed to go to work for Mr. Howell. Charlotte and Marianne walked up, and Marianne was looking sort of discouraged. She informed them all, "We have more problems than just superstitions. Something or someone broke into the storage hut and looted our supplies. There isn't much left in there now." "Yep," Charlotte added, "broke the back wall right down, they did." Everyone made their way back to the storage hut. Professor Hinckley observed, "What's really strange is how the brush is all broken down through the jungle leading up to here. It was something very large and heavy that broke in here. I'm amazed we've never seen it before." Professor Collins smiled. "Well, maybe this is a clue. It looks like the only thing that was disturbed were sweets." Charlotte smiled proudly. "That's an astute observation, Pops. But look over there," she exclaimed, pointing. Staring at them from the jungle was a giant ant. I mean, really giant. Dan Collins exclaimed, "Oh, my Lord! Everyone run!" Professor Hinckley added excitedly as they were all dashing away, "Follow the skipper to the caves." Soon the hut village was deserted, and the 10 castaways were safely hiding in the dark cave where Gilligan and Danny had found all the ancient artifacts. And of course, everyone was abuzz talking about the giant ant. "Now listen, everyone," Professor Hinckley said. "It is true the ant is gargantuan in size, but it's from a common species that are pretty harmless to humans. They're plant eaters. Still, we have to get rid of them before they defoliate the whole island." Gilligan added, "And besides that, they might eat all the plants." "Gilligan," Skipper said, rolling his eyes, "that's what defoliate means." Mrs. Howell asked, "Where did they come from? We've never seen them before." "I think I have an answer to that, Mrs. Howell," Dan Collins replied. "Nuclear testing on some of the neighboring islands is likely the cause. In fact, there may be other giants out there that we've not seen yet." "I concur," Professor Hinckley added. Gilligan then explained innocently, "Professor Collins, don't be mad if Professor Hinckley concurs with you. Even if he doesn't, I agree with you." The skipper took off his hat and smacked Gilligan on the head. "Concur means he agrees with him, Gilligan." Gilligan's face turned a little red. "Well then, why don't you just speak in English so I can understand?" The skipper took off his hat and once again smacked Gilligan. "All right, gentlemen," the professor said. "Until we find how many giants are out and about, we better stay in or very close to the cave. Mr. Howell, you take the girls into the village and collect what we need to stay here for a few days. Skipper, you and Gilligan go scout the other side of the island. Professor Collins, Danny, Charlotte, and I will stick together and scout the other side of the island." Gilligan and the skipper set out. When they got to the bay, Gilligan climbed a tall palm tree and scanned the island. Right there on the beach he saw a crab, a huge crab, that made the ant look like its growth had been stunted. It was bigger than big. Gilligan came down so fast that his hands were burned from sliding against the bark. "Skipper, skipper," he said, but the skipper cut him off. "We better get back quick and tell the others, but keep a sharp watch, Gilligan. Who knows what other giant monsters might be out there?" I'll be careful, Gilligan replied as they dashed off. On the other side of the island, Thurston and his wife and Ginger and Mary Ann packed supplies to take back to the cave. However, they ended up running into their own menace, a giant mosquito. They quickly gathered their supplies and ran off. "Hurry, Lovey, he's almost on us," Thurston implored. "But Thurston," Lovey said breathlessly, "it can't eat me. I'm not dressed for dinner. I mean, really." And what are Professor Hinckley and the Time Hoppers running into? Professor Hinckley looked out across the sky with concern. "Well, we have more problems than the giants right now. See how hazy the sky is out that way? There's a bad tropical storm coming in, just what we need right now." That night for dinner, Mary Ann served a crab and coconut casserole in the cave. Danny picked up his fork and spoon and banged them on the table, because he was very hungry. Charlotte shot him an annoyed glance. "Have some manners, Danny. We're shipwrecked, but you can still have manners. Put your eating utensils down." At supper, Professor Hinckley announced, "We've got another problem. The radio said that a very bad tropical storm is headed this way. It should be setting in about dusk tomorrow." "Tell them the rest," Professor Collins urged. "What is it?" the skipper asked with concern. "I ran some tests on the tissue samples from the ant. I would say that the results of the radiation on the giants is temporary. In fact, the heavy rains from the coming storms might even wash the radiation off them." Dan Collins added, "But we all better stay close to the cave. I mean it, Danny and Charlotte. You don't go out anywhere unless you are with me." So to keep themselves busy, Danny and Gilligan began digging for more artifacts, not really realizing that the witch doctor, who watches over the ancient relics, was in fact watching them from another passageway in the cave. Me ticked big time," the witch doctor said with anger, but quietly enough that he would not be heard. "They disturb ancient family relics. Ug'em bug'em, I get even. I do some voodoo dolls." Well, that night, some strange things began happening in the cave. Each of the castaways, as well as the time hoppers, found that some small personal item was missing. They didn't know the witch doctor was behind it, though the skipper suspected there was black magic afoot on their island. It was not long before the castaways began experiencing other strange things, like Gilligan and Danny's feet getting burning hot, and then Mary Ann and Charlotte were tickled all over like a feather was rubbing against them. And Professor Hinckley, while making fun of the skipper's superstitions about the islands, was turned into a stone-faced zombie just standing there, unmoving. "What are we going to do?" Ginger lamented. "Professor Collins, is there any way we can help him?" "Yeah, Mr. Collins," Gilligan added. "Is there any way we can unzombie, de-zombie? E-zombie? Is there any way we can make the professor better?" Thurston Howell complained. "But what are we going to do with the professor in this condition? We have giant monsters and a bad storm on the way, and then some very strange things going on, too." "Not to fear, friends," Professor Collins assured. "I will help all I can, but there sure are some pretty strange things going on, that's for sure." Charlotte spoke up. "Maybe it's because of the witch doctor." The skipper looked puzzled. "Witch doctor?" Pointing to the shadowed passage entrance, Charlotte said, "That doctor." In the entry to the passageway, the witch doctor stood, bone in his nose, and smiling gleefully. "See here," Mr. Howell roared, "are you responsible for all the weird things going on around here? Ugh, me am. Me want 'em you all out of Cave of Ancestors." Professor Collins scratched his head, trying to figure out what he should do. He looked at Danny, and they gave each other a nod. "Hurry, Danny. You know what needs to be done." Danny lurched forward toward the witch doctor, who was taken totally by surprise, pulled the bone from his nose, and tossed it to his dad. Danny backed off quickly as the witch doctor, very angrily, danced and stomped wildly, waving his arms. "Give me Uggum Buggum bone back now! Give me bone back!" Professor Collins smiled, tossing the nose bone up and down in his hand. "Give me bone!" the angry native demanded. "No can do," Professor Collins replied. "Everyone knows that a witch doctor carries his power in his bone." With that, Dan tossed it into the fire. "Now you have no power left. You better leave the island before we decide to cook you for supper." "Me leave 'em, but me be back. You not see last of Uggum Buggum me." The witch doctor disappeared down the dark passage. "But what about the professor?" Ginger asked. Professor Collins explained. "The zombie spell will wear off soon. He'll be all right, thanks to Danny's bravery." Charlie ran up to Danny, threw her arms around him, and gave him a big hug and said, "Danny, my brother, you're my hero." As a special reward that night, before bed, Ginger and Mary Ann gave Danny a whole grapefruit cake and coconut cream pie, all for himself. During the night, as most everyone slept, Dan Collins and the skipper kept watch as the heavy storms began to move in. And storm it did. Not even the hurricane the time hoppers encountered in Florida in 1966 was as bad as this. The storm raged for 3 days and nights, and the only ones who ventured out of the safety of the cave was Dan Collins, the skipper, and Professor Hinckley, who had finally recovered from the witch doctor's spell. At least they did not have to worry about any of the giant creatures while they were safely in the cave and the storm was raging. Every once in a while they stood at the cave entrance watching the rain, the wind, and the lightning. They never saw a trace of the giants. Soon the storm passed, and life was getting back to normal. In fact, the rain had indeed solved the problem of the giant critters. They reverted back to their normal size after the radiation was washed away. One moment Gilligan was being chased down a path by a giant centipede, and the next it shrunk back to its normal size and was under Gilligan's tennis shoe heel being squashed. Ginger was about to be attacked by a giant crab, and the next moment it was being ready to be part of dinner. The professors had repaired the time hopper, but there was a problem. Because of the crude parts, only the 3 time hoppers could leave. Any more weight would cause the circuits to overload again. On the morning they were to leave, everyone was gathered around the time hopper. Professor Collins explained, "As soon as we get back to our time, I'll fix the time hoppers with the right parts, and we'll be back to rescue all of you." Danny looked a little sad. "I hate to leave. This is such a cool place, but we'll be back real soon." As souvenirs, Danny packed one of the idols he and Gilligan had found, and Charlotte took a really nice ancient pot from the cave, and Professor Collins took some fine stone spear points home with him. The castaways said so long. The time hoppers entered the time machine and were soon on their way back to the future. But they were never able to return. They tried and tried to locate the castaways again, but were never able to find them. And oh yeah, the witch doctor was still very uggum-buggum mad.